Two couples, bored with routine, decide to swap partners and indulge in forbidden passion, completely surrendering to their deepest desires. As the heat intensifies, they experience a seductive thrill and cross emotional boundaries they never thought possible. In the end, their relationships undergo an irreversible shift, leaving their bonds more intricate and intense than ever before. You just need to subscribe and like to hear different stories every day. My name is Alex, and for the past few years, life has been a predictable cycle of work, evenings with friends, and quiet nights with my girlfriend, Emily. Emily and I had built a solid relationship, one that people would often compliment as being perfect. We shared our lives with our closest friends, John and Sarah, another couple we'd known since college. We were a tight-knit group, the kind of friends who did everything together: weekend trips, dinner parties, and lazy movie nights. But something had been brewing beneath the surface for some time. Unspoken, but undeniable. Emily was beautiful, delicate in her features, with a slender frame and dark, penetrating eyes. She had a gentle demeanor that charmed everyone around her, but beneath that softness, there was a fire, a kind of quiet intensity that came out when we were alone. I loved her, and she loved me, but like all relationships, ours had fallen into a routine. And routine, as comforting as it could be, sometimes left us both wondering if we were missing out on something. John and Sarah, too, had an undeniable chemistry. Sarah was bold and outgoing, her energy contagious. She had a mischievous side that always kept us on our toes, and John, ever the steady presence, seemed to balance her out perfectly. Together, they made the kind of couple you couldn't help but admire, a dynamic duo who were always up for a good time. One evening, after a long week of work, we all gathered at John and Sarah's place for one of our usual nights, and some drinks, some laughs, and a movie. We had settled into their cozy living room, the low hum of conversation filling the space as the wine flowed freely. The air was relaxed, the kind of comfort that comes with years of friendship. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted to more personal topics: relationships, desires, the things we wanted out of life. It started innocently enough, John joking about how marriage was supposed to be the adventure of life, and how, ironically, the adventure sometimes turned into endless routine. We laughed, agreeing, sharing stories about the daily grind and the occasional tedium of long-term relationships. Then Sarah, always the bold one, broke the rhythm with a question that hung in the air like an electric charge. "Do you ever think," she began slowly, swirling her wine glass in her hand, "that maybe we've all gotten too comfortable?" The room fell quiet for a moment. Emily, sitting beside me, shifted in her seat, her fingers brushing against my leg as if testing the waters. John glanced over at me, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. I raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable how?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew exactly what she meant. Sarah's lips curled into a sly smile as she leaned back in her chair, her gaze moving between Emily and me. "You know what I mean," she said, her tone teasing. "We do the same things, over and over again. Same dinners, same movies, same conversations. Sometimes I just wonder, what if there's more?" Emily's fingers tightened slightly on my arm, and when I looked over at her, there was a spark in her eyes, a curiosity that mirrored my own. She said nothing, but the silence between us was filled with possibility. John, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, chimed in. "Maybe we do need something to shake things up," he said, his voice lower, more serious than before. He looked over at Sarah, then back at me. "You ever feel like trying something new?" My heart raced. There it was, the question that had been lingering in the back of all our minds, the one none of us had dared to say out loud until now. It wasn't just about boredom or routine, it was about desire, about exploring something unspoken between us. I glanced at Emily, who met my gaze with a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her lips parted slightly as if she was about to speak, but instead, she leaned closer, her breath warm against my neck, as she whispered, "What if we did?" The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I could feel my pulse quicken. The thought of what she was suggesting, what we were all thinking, was intoxicating. It was dangerous, thrilling, and undeniably tempting. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Maybe," she said slowly, her voice dripping with suggestion, "we should make things a little more interesting tonight." John chuckled, but there was a seriousness behind his smile. "I think we could all use a bit of excitement," he said, his gaze locking with mine. There was no mistaking the look in his eyes. It was a challenge, an invitation, and the thrill of the unknown all wrapped into one. The tension in the room thickened, the air heavy with anticipation. Emily's hand slipped into mine, her fingers warm against my skin as she gave me a gentle squeeze. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, and I knew that we were on the edge of something we couldn't turn back from. Without another word, Sarah stood up, her movements slow and deliberate as she walked across the room toward me. She stood in front of me for a moment, her eyes searching mine, before reaching out and taking my hand in hers. "Come on," she whispered, her voice low and sultry. "Let's see where this goes." I glanced at Emily one last time, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. But there was none, only a quiet, burning desire that mirrored my own. She nodded slightly, her lips curving into a small smile as she released my hand and gave me a look that said everything without needing words. Sarah tugged gently on my hand, leading me toward the hallway that led to the guest room. Behind us, I could hear the soft rustle of movement, Emily and John following suit, their footsteps light and quiet against the hardwood floor. My heart pounded in my chest as Sarah led me into the dimly lit room, the door clicking shut softly behind us. The quiet hum of the night outside felt distant, almost unreal, as if the world beyond the four of us had faded away, leaving only the electric tension that filled the space between us. Sarah turned to face me, her eyes dark with desire as she stepped closer, her hands sliding up my chest. Her touch was light, teasing, but it sent a shiver of excitement through me. She leaned in, her lips brushing against my ear, as she whispered, "Are you ready for something different?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing. There was no turning back now. We had all crossed a line, and whatever came next, we were in it together. I nodded slowly, my breath catching in my throat as Sarah's hand slid lower, her touch becoming more insistent. In that moment, I couldn't help but think about Emily, about what she was doing, what she was feeling. The thought of her with John, the image of her touching him, the way she touched me, sent a thrill through me that was equal parts excitement and uncertainty. But there was no room for doubt now, only the heat of the moment, the desire that had been building for so long, finally ready to be unleashed. As Sarah led me into the guest room, her fingers laced with mine, the tension between us crackled like static electricity in the air. The soft click of the door closing behind us felt final, like a barrier shutting out the rest of the world, leaving only the two of us in this private, electric space. Sarah turned to face me, her eyes gleaming with mischief and desire. Her lips parted slightly as she stepped closer, her body brushing against mine, and I could feel the heat of her skin even through the thin fabric of her dress. My heart raced, the anticipation building inside me like a drumbeat, steady and insistent. "You look nervous," she whispered, her lips curving into a playful smile as her fingers trailed lightly down my chest. I swallowed hard, the heat of the moment making it difficult to find my voice. "Maybe a little," I admitted, with a breathless laugh, "but in a good way." Sarah's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of the unknown. "Good," she said softly, her fingers continuing their slow, teasing journey down my torso. "I like it when you're nervous." Her words sent a shiver through me, and I felt my pulse quicken as her touch grew bolder. There was something intoxicating about her confidence, the way she seemed to know exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. It was a stark contrast to the gentle, playful energy Emily usually brought to our relationship, and that difference only made the moment more exciting. Sarah leaned in closer, her breath warm against my neck, as she whispered, "Do you know how long I've been thinking about this? About what it would be like to be with you?" Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with desire and invitation. I could feel my skin tingling with anticipation, every nerve ending on high alert as her lips brushed against my ear, sending a jolt of electricity down my spine. "What about John?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Sarah chuckled softly, her fingers sliding up to cup my face as she tilted my head to meet her gaze. "John knows exactly what's happening," she said, her voice low and sultry. "In fact, I think he's enjoying this just as much as we are." The thought of John and Emily in the other room doing God knows what sent a fresh wave of excitement through me. I couldn't help but imagine Emily, her body pressed against John's, his hands exploring her in ways I had never allowed anyone else to. The image was as thrilling as it was unsettling, a heady mix of jealousy and arousal that left me dizzy with anticipation. Sarah must have sensed my thoughts, because she smiled knowingly, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "It's okay," she whispered. "This is exactly what we all want, isn't it?" I hesitated for only a moment before nodding, my breath coming in shallow gasps as Sarah's hand slid lower, her touch growing more insistent. She stepped back just enough to let her dress fall to the floor, leaving her standing in front of me in nothing but a lace bra and panties. The sight of her so bold, so confident was enough to make my head spin. "You're beautiful," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. Sarah smiled, a slow, seductive smile that sent a thrill through me. "I know," she teased, stepping closer again and pulling me down onto the bed with her. "Now come here. I've been waiting for this." Her hands were all over me in an instant, her touch both demanding and tender as she explored my body with a kind of hunger that took my breath away. I could feel her skin against mine, soft and warm, as she kissed me with a ferocity that left me dizzy. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, flashes of Emily, of John, of what we were all doing in these rooms that had suddenly become worlds unto themselves. But there was no time for hesitation, no space for doubt. Sarah's hands found the edge of my shirt, and with one swift motion, she pulled it over my head, tossing it to the floor before pressing herself against me once more. Her lips moved to my neck, her breath hot and heavy as she whispered my name, sending shivers down my spine. "I've wanted this for so long," she murmured between kisses, her voice thick with desire. "You have no idea how much I've thought about this, about being with you." Her words sent a thrill through me, and I could feel my body responding to her in ways that left me breathless. I had never seen the side of Sarah before, so bold, so unapologetically seductive, and it was intoxicating. There was something about the way she moved, the way she touched me, that made it impossible to think about anything else. "Then let's not wait any longer," I whispered, my voice low and filled with the same hunger I saw reflected in her eyes. She smiled at that, her hands moving to the waistband of my pants, and in that moment, all thoughts of Emily and John faded into the background. There was only Sarah and me, and the overwhelming desire that had been building between us for so long. Meanwhile, across the hall in the master bedroom, Emily found herself in a similar situation, though her approach was more tentative, more cautious. She had always been the gentler one, the one who preferred subtlety over boldness. But tonight, as she stood in front of John, her fingers trailing lightly over his chest, she could feel something inside her shifting, something that wanted to step outside of the boundaries she had always known. John watched her with a patient smile, his hands resting lightly on her hips as she took her time exploring the contours of his body. There was something thrilling about this being with someone who wasn't Alex, someone who brought a different kind of energy into the room. It made her heart race, made her feel alive in ways she hadn't expected. "You're beautiful," John whispered, his voice low and filled with admiration as he pulled her closer. Emily blushed at the compliment, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers trembling slightly as they moved higher, tracing the line of his collarbone. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping even closer, her body pressing against his as she leaned in for a kiss. The kiss was soft at first, tentative and careful, but it quickly deepened as John responded, his hands sliding up to cradle her face. Emily felt her heart pounding in her chest, a mix of nerves and excitement that left her breathless. She had never imagined herself in this situation, kissing another man, exploring this kind of forbidden territory, but now that she was here, she found that it was thrilling in ways she hadn't anticipated. John's hands moved lower, resting on her waist as he pulled her closer still, their bodies pressed together in a way that felt both foreign and exhilarating. Emily let out a soft sigh, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair as she deepened the kiss, letting herself get lost in the moment. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly free to explore, to indulge in her desires without fear of judgment or guilt. And it was that freedom, that sense of release, that made the moment all the more intoxicating. The air was thick with tension, every touch between Sarah and me charged with electricity. Her body pressed against mine as we lay on the bed, our breathing ragged and heavy. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the softness of her curves, and the unmistakable hunger in her eyes as she pulled me closer. There was no going back now. We had crossed a line, one that none of us could uncross. Sarah's hands roamed my body with a kind of confident exploration, as if she had been waiting for this moment far longer than I had realized. Her fingers trailed down my chest, sending shivers through me with every touch, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered things I never expected to hear from her. "I've wanted this for so long, Alex," she murmured, her breath warm against my skin. "I always wondered what it would be like to be with you instead of just watching from afar." Her words sent a thrill through me, and I couldn't help but think of Emily, wondering if she was experiencing the same intensity with John in the other room. The thought of her with him, their bodies entwined, only heightened the excitement of the moment. Sarah shifted slightly, her movements slow and deliberate, as she climbed on top of me, her hands pressing against my chest as she looked down at me with a mischievous smile. She was in control now, guiding the rhythm of our bodies as she moved against me, teasing, testing, driving me to the edge. "Do you like this?" she whispered, her voice dripping with seduction, as she leaned down to kiss my neck. "Do you like being with me?" I couldn't form the words, my mind too clouded with desire to respond coherently. Instead, I nodded, my hands gripping her hips as I let myself get lost in the moment, the weight of what we were doing slipping away with each passing second. Sarah's touch was both tender and fierce, her movements confident as she continued to explore, testing my limits, pushing me further than I thought possible. I could feel the heat between us building, an intensity that left me breathless and wanting more. She leaned down again, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, her hands sliding up to tangle in my hair as she deepened the kiss. I responded eagerly, pulling her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against mine as the world outside the room faded into nothingness. For a moment, there was nothing but the two of us caught in a whirlwind of desire and temptation. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a revelation, as if we were discovering parts of ourselves we had never known existed. The boundaries that had once defined our relationships had disappeared, replaced by something raw and primal, something we couldn't deny. But as the moments stretched on, I couldn't help but wonder about Emily and John. The thought of them together, sharing the same kind of intensity we were, sent a thrill through me that was equal parts excitement and jealousy. I imagined Emily with John's hands on her, his lips against her skin, and the image both excited and unnerved me. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Emily lay beneath John, her heart pounding in her chest as she felt his body pressing against hers, his hands sliding over her skin with a gentle but insistent touch. There was a tenderness to his movements, a careful exploration, that made her feel both cherished and desired. It was different from the way Alex touched her, softer, more deliberate, but that difference was what made it so thrilling. John's lips brushed against her collarbone, sending shivers through her as he moved slowly, taking his time with each touch, each kiss. Emily let out a soft sigh, her hands tangling in his hair as she tilted her head back, allowing herself to fully surrender to the moment. "Is this what you wanted?" John whispered, his breath warm against her neck. Emily opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a look that spoke volumes. She didn't need to say anything, her body's response was answer enough. She had wanted this, more than she had realized, and now that it was happening, she found herself swept up in a wave of desire that left her breathless. John's hands moved lower, his fingers tracing the curve of her waist before slipping beneath the waistband of her panties. Emily's breath hitched as she felt his touch, her body responding to him in ways that made her both excited and nervous. She had never been with anyone but Alex, and the thought of someone else touching her so intimately was both thrilling and terrifying. But as John's fingers explored, she found herself letting go of her reservations, giving into the heat that was building between them. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to get lost in the sensation of his touch, the softness of his lips against her skin, the way his body moved against hers. For a moment, the world outside the bedroom ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, caught in a dance of desire and discovery, their bodies moving together in a rhythm that felt both natural and new. It was unlike anything Emily had experienced before, more intense, more thrilling, and she couldn't help but wonder what Alex was feeling in the other room. The thought of him with Sarah sent a jolt of excitement through her, and she found herself imagining what they were doing, how they were touching each other. The image made her heart race, and she felt a surge of desire that only heightened the intensity of the moment. John seemed to sense her thoughts, because he leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, "Are you thinking about them?" Emily nodded, her breath coming in shallow gasps as John's hands continued their exploration. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with anticipation. John smiled, his lips curving into a mischievous grin as he kissed her neck. "Me too," he murmured, his voice low and filled with desire. But right now, I only want to think about you." His words sent a shiver down her spine, and Emily found herself pulled deeper into the moment, the thought of Alex and Sarah fading into the background as she focused on John's touch, his kiss, the way he made her feel. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly free to explore, to indulge in her desires without fear of judgment or guilt. It was that freedom, that sense of release, that made the moment all the more intoxicating. Back in the guest room, Sarah was moving against me with a slow, deliberate rhythm, her body pressed against mine as she kissed me with a fierce hunger that left me breathless. I could feel the heat between us building, an intensity that made it hard to think about anything else but the moment, the here and now. As Sarah moved, her breath coming in soft, shallow gasps, I felt myself losing control, the weight of the moment finally catching up to me. There was no going back now. We had crossed the line, and there was nothing left but to give in completely. "Alex," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with desire, "I want you now." Her words sent a jolt of excitement through me, and I responded without hesitation, pulling her closer, feeling the heat of her skin against mine as we gave in to the desire that had been building for so long. Every touch, every kiss, was filled with an urgency that left us both breathless, our bodies moving together in a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped, leaving only the two of us, lost in a whirlwind of passion and desire. There were no more boundaries, no more rules, only the freedom to explore, to indulge in the temptation that had brought us to this moment. And as we moved together, I couldn't help but think of Emily, wondering if she was feeling the same intensity, the same thrill of crossing the line. The thought of her with John only fueled the fire inside me, driving me to new heights of desire as I lost myself in the moment with Sarah. The room was filled with nothing but the soft sounds of our breathing, punctuated by the quiet creaks of the bed as Sarah moved above me. The intensity between us had grown to a fever pitch, each touch sending waves of heat through my body, each kiss deepening the sense of abandon that had taken over the night. Sarah was relentless in her seduction, her eyes locked with mine as she moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm that left me breathless. She was confident, teasing, driving me to the edge with every subtle shift of her hips, every brush of her lips against my skin. She knew exactly what she was doing, and the power she held over me in that moment was undeniable. "Do you like this?" she whispered, her voice thick with desire, as she leaned down to kiss me, her breath warm against my lips. "Do you like being with me, Alex?" I could barely manage to respond, my mind clouded with the overwhelming sensation of her body pressed against mine. I nodded, my hands gripping her hips as I pulled her closer, desperate for more of her touch, more of the intoxicating feeling she brought with her. Sarah smiled, a slow, seductive smile that made my pulse quicken. She moved against me with a kind of grace and confidence that left me breathless, her fingers tracing light patterns on my skin as she whispered words of encouragement, pushing me further and further into the depths of desire. "Let go," she whispered, her voice a low, sultry murmur that sent shivers down my spine. "Let go of everything, Alex. I want you to forget about everything else. Just focus on this. Focus on us." Her words washed over me like a wave, and I felt myself giving in completely, the weight of the world slipping away as I focused solely on the moment, on the heat between us, on the overwhelming desire that had taken over every inch of my body. I could feel her breath against my neck, her skin warm and soft beneath my hands, and the sensation of her lips on mine was enough to drive me to the brink of madness. But as much as I was lost in the moment with Sarah, a part of my mind couldn't help but wander to Emily. I imagined her in the other room with John, their bodies entwined in the same dance of temptation and passion that Sarah and I had found ourselves in. The thought of Emily with another man should have made me uneasy, but instead, it only heightened the excitement, making every touch, every kiss with Sarah feel even more intense. Across the hall, Emily was experiencing her own whirlwind of emotions, her body pressed against John's as they explored the boundaries they had once thought were unbreakable. His touch was different from Alex's, gentler in some ways, but filled with the same hunger, the same need that had driven them both to this point. John's lips brushed against Emily's neck, sending shivers through her as he whispered her name, his breath hot against her skin. She let out a soft sigh, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair as she tilted her head back, giving herself over to the moment. She had never imagined herself in this situation, had never thought she would be capable of crossing this line, but now that she was here, she couldn't deny how right it felt. "Are you okay?" John asked softly, his voice filled with genuine concern as he looked down at her, his hands resting lightly on her hips. Emily nodded, her breath coming in soft, shallow gasps as she looked up at him, her heart racing in her chest. "I'm more than okay," she whispered, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I never thought I'd be here, but I'm glad I am." John smiled in return, his hands sliding up to cradle her face as he leaned down to kiss her softly, his lips lingering on hers for just a moment before pulling back to meet her gaze. "Me too," he murmured, his voice low and filled with warmth. "You have no idea how much I've thought about this, about you." Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words, a mix of excitement and nervousness flooding her senses as she let herself get lost in the moment. She had never been with anyone other than Alex, and the thought of being with John, of allowing herself to explore this new connection, was thrilling in ways she hadn't expected. John's hands moved lower, his touch gentle but insistent, as he explored her body with a kind of reverence that made her feel both desired and cherished. Emily responded eagerly, her hands sliding over his skin as she pressed herself closer, their bodies moving together in a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. For a moment, it felt as though the world outside the room had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in a cocoon of heat and desire. Emily had never felt so free, so unburdened by the weight of expectation, and it was that sense of liberation that made the moment all the more intoxicating. Back in the guest room, Sarah's movements had become more insistent, her breath coming in soft gasps as she pushed us both closer to the edge. Every touch, every kiss, was filled with a kind of urgency that left me dizzy, and I could feel the tension between us building with every passing second. I pulled Sarah closer, my hands gripping her hips as I kissed her with a fierce intensity, driven by the heat of the moment and the knowledge that we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But even as I lost myself in the moment with her, a part of me couldn't help but think of Emily, of what she was doing, of how she was feeling, and whether or not this was everything we had hoped it would be. "Alex," Sarah whispered, her voice breathless, as she leaned down to kiss me again, her lips soft and warm against mine. "This is incredible. I never imagined it would feel like this." I could only nod in response, my mind too, clouded with desire to form coherent words. The intensity between us had reached a fever pitch, and I could feel the weight of everything that had led us to this moment pressing down on me. There was no going back now, only the freedom to explore, to indulge in the desires we had kept hidden for so long. And as we moved together, lost in the whirlwind of passion and temptation, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room where Sarah and I lay tangled in the sheets. The intensity of the night before had faded, leaving behind a quiet calm. The storm had passed, and in its wake was a strange sense of peace, like we had all crossed into uncharted territory together and were now left to navigate the aftermath. I turned my head to look at Sarah, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm as she slept. There was a small smile on her lips, her hair spread out across the pillow in soft waves. I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions as I watched her: satisfaction, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty about what would come next. Last night had been everything I imagined and more. The tension, the thrill, the allure of the forbidden, it had all built up into something neither of us could resist. But now, in the soft light of the morning, reality began to set in. What we had done was exhilarating, yes, but it was also something we could never take back. I quietly slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Sarah as I dressed. My mind raced with thoughts of Emily, wondering how she was feeling, what she had experienced. The connection between us had always been strong, and while last night was something new for both of us, I couldn't help but worry about how it might have changed things between us. As I made my way to the kitchen, I was surprised to find John already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up as I entered, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice low and calm. "Morning," I replied, unsure of what to say next. The weight of everything that had happened between us hung in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to address it. John took a sip of his coffee before setting the cup down on the counter. "Last night was different," he said slowly, his eyes meeting mine. "But I think we all knew this was coming." I nodded, letting out a slow breath as I ran a hand through my hair. "Yeah, I think you're right. It feels strange now. What does this mean for us? John's smile softened, and he shrugged slightly. I'm not sure, he admitted, but I don't regret it. We've always been close, the four of us, and maybe this was just the next step in our relationship. I guess the real question is, how do we move forward from here? That was the question I had been dreading, the one I didn't have an answer for. Last night had been an adventure, an exploration of boundaries and desires that we had all kept hidden for so long. But now, in the light of day, those boundaries had shifted, and we had to figure out what that meant for all of us. As if on cue, Emily appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, but her eyes clear and calm. She met my gaze with a small smile, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Whatever had happened between her and John last night, it hadn't broken us. If anything, it seemed to have brought us closer. Morning, she said softly, as she crossed the room to stand beside me. Her hand slipped into mine, her fingers warm against my skin, and I squeezed her hand gently, letting her know that I was still here, still with her. Morning, I replied, my voice soft but steady. I could see the question in her eyes, the same question that had been running through my mind all morning. What now? Before any of us could speak, Sarah appeared behind Emily, her expression relaxed and easy. She moved to stand next to John, her body language casual, as if the events of the previous night hadn't left any lingering tension between us. Well, Sarah said, with a playful grin, that was an interesting night. John chuckled, shaking his head slightly. You could say that. Emily squeezed my hand again before glancing over at Sarah, her smile widening. I think it was something we all needed, she said softly. It wasn't just about the physical stuff. It was about exploring something different, something new. And I don't regret it. Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes warm as she looked between the three of us. Neither do I, she said. But I think we need to be honest with each other about how we feel about where we go from here. The room fell into a comfortable silence, each of us lost in our thoughts as we considered what Sarah had said. The truth was, none of us knew what the future held. We had crossed a line, and there was no way to go back to the way things had been before. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Finally, John broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. I think the most important thing is that we don't let this change who we are. We're still the same people, still the same friends. We just explored something new, and that's okay. I nodded, feeling a sense of clarity settle over me. John was right. We had always been close, the four of us, and this was just another step in our journey together. It didn't have to define us, but it was a part of who we were now, and that was something we could embrace. Emily leaned her head against my shoulder, her fingers still intertwined with mine. I think we'll be okay, she said softly, her voice filled with quiet confidence. As long as we're honest with each other and keep communicating, I think we can handle whatever comes next. Sarah smiled at that, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Well, I don't know about you guys, she said with a laugh, but I'm not opposed to continuing to explore. John chuckled, wrapping an arm around her waist as he pulled her closer. We'll take it one step at a time, he said, his voice filled with warmth. But yeah, I'm not opposed to it either. I looked down at Emily, her eyes bright with amusement, and I couldn't help but smile. Whatever came next, we would face it together just like we always had. As we sat around the kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the windows, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The night before had been intense, filled with temptation and desire, but now, in the light of day, everything felt different. The four of us were still the same, still connected by our shared history and the bond we had built over the years. But now, there was something new between us, a shared understanding, a willingness to explore the boundaries of our relationships in ways we hadn't before. It was exciting, yes, but it was also something we would have to navigate carefully. John raised his coffee cup in a mock toast, his smile easy and relaxed. To new adventures, he said, his voice filled with warmth. We all raised our cups in response, the tension of the night before replaced by a quiet, comfortable camaraderie. Whatever happened next, we would face it together, with open hearts and open minds. And as I looked around the table at the people I loved, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for the future. The boundaries that had once defined us had shifted, and in their place was a new kind of freedom to explore, to push limits, and to discover what lay beyond the familiar. Whatever came next, I knew that we would handle it together.